7 Ways to Annihilate Sufferings by Using the Method of Making the Mind to Work in Accordance with the Will. Thera Tik Thon Lak, extracted from the Buddha's original teachings, the original words of Buddha teaching, Book 2, permitted to print and disseminate by T.G. 2011, pages 60-90. Buddha's Teachings. Bhikkhus, thanks for using the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. The unborn sufferings will not arise, and the born sufferings have been born will annihilated. Bhikkhus. 1/Sufferings must be eradicated by knowledge. 2/Sufferings must be eradicated by protection. 3/Sufferings must be eradicated by receiving. 4/Sufferings must be eradicated by endurance. 5/Sufferings must be eradicated by avoided. 6/Sufferings must be eradicated by annihilation. 7/Sufferings must be eradicated by cultivation. Note: above are the Buddha's teachings on the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. The method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will uses to practice the mind without suffering. In Buddhism, the highest level is the mind without suffering. When the mind without suffering, that person becomes arahant. Here, this teaching shows us to cultivate the mind without adversity, i.e., the practice to end misery. Buddha's teachings are very practical and specific. Nevertheless, in Buddhism has other teachings which does not teach us how to avoid suffering, but it teaches us to perceive the nature of Buddha. When the perception of the nature of Buddha is complete, the mind still cannot eradicate all sufferings. So, when he already became a Buddha, but he still has sufferings? So, what does the Buddha mean? Enlightened Buddha nature, enlightened this world is false, is illusory? Understanding is one thing, but want to live a mind immobilized must practice with the best. Would you answer it? That is an incorrect understanding of heresy by their imagination. Isn't it? Between the two current Buddhist, Theravada and Mahayana, what suttas are correct? To have precise answer, only the practitioner whose mind without suffering can tell. So, at the present time, Buddhist monk can live without suffering, mastering birth, aging, sickness, death and master reincarnation termination? Values of monks are at the minds without sufferings. These monks whose minds are without sufferings could justify which Buddhist is correct or incorrect, have enough confidence in the answers. Is that true, my friends? Buddhists practice to eliminate sufferings, but not to recite Buddha's name for rebirth in the Western paradise. Nevertheless, the Pure Land method specializes in reciting name of Amitabha Buddha to achieve single-mindedly. In 7 days, continuously recite the name of Amitabha. The mind do not be disturbed by anything else. But when the mind is single-mindedly by reciting the name of Amitabha, the illusion world will appear. Those who recite Buddha's name think the paradise world is real. They do not know it appears by elusive thought. That ones reciting Buddha's name thought, the ones who recite the Buddha name with single-minded, then sufferings will be extinguished. That idea is very wrong, unbelievable, because reciting the Buddha's name to achieve single-mindedly mind is compress the mind rather than terminate sufferings. So practitioners can't eradicate their sufferings. Is that correct? Reconsider Theravada texts. The Buddha taught us to destroy directly evilness, very clear and specific. it is the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Be cautious, my friends. And the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will is the right practice of Buddhism. You must have a lucid mind to judge. Do not let pagans lure you in the wrong view, wrong meditation, wrong concentration, wrong reciting Buddha's name, etc. If you want to get mind free from suffering, we have 7 practices to make the mind works in accordance with the will, as follows. The first way, the Buddha taught, there are sufferings to be eradicated by knowledge. So the first Dhamma is to use knowledge to eradicate. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is the understanding by consciousness. Thanks to consciousness, we use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Sufferings will be ceased. But consciousness has 2 sides. 1/wrong view, it is the evil consciousness. 2/right view, it is the wholesome consciousness. The wholesome consciousness called right view, thanks to wholesome consciousness, with it we break evil away to eradicate sufferings. If we want to have good knowledge, we must meet the saint, the great men, listen to him, thoroughly understand the Dhamma, then practice as the Buddha often taught in the Sutta. Bhikkhus, there is an ordinary person who does not meet and listen to the saint, and unskillful in the Dhamma's training, has not practiced the Dhamma, has not seen the great men, has not skillful in Dhamma's training, has not practiced their Dhammas. So, we must know and use carefully the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. The requirement of using that method is to get rid of greed, anger, hatred, ignorance, and 5 desires of sensual pleasures, fame, wealth, sexual impurity, eating and sleeping. For example, when my mind has hatred, I know my mind having hatred, knowing hatred is an evil that makes my mind suffers. The knowledge of hatred and suffering is the volition knowledge. If I would like to end to these sufferings, I have as of the reason liberation to use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Mean feeling of anger are sufferings, do not feelings of anger are not sufferings. But I would like to end this suffering, I have as of the reason liberation to use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Means the mind feels of anger is suffering, the mind does not feel of anger is not suffering. Here is a phrase: the using of intention knowledge as reasons for cessation of suffering. Hatred is suffering, arises from the body and mind, or hatred is suffering, I do not accept you, you must leave here. These are the choice right characteristic of every practitioner. That 7 factors of enlightenment called the choose, investigation, factor of enlightenment, using the knowledge to eradicate the suffering. We should read the following passage. We will see the Buddha taught very clear and specific about how to use the volition knowledge. Bhikkhus, what is suffering to be rid of from knowledge by eradication? Bhikkhus, there is an ordinary person that is little to hear, does not see the sages, does not skill in the Dhammas of the sages, does not practice Dhammas of the saint, does not see the great men, does not practice their Dhammas, does not skill in their Dhammas, does not know the thing needs have the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, does not know the thing needs not have this method. This bhikkhu does not know the thing needs have this method, because he does not know the thing needs have this method. He should use this method. The thing needs not have this method, and does not use this method. The thing needs have this method. Bhikkhus, and how is the thing need not have the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will that he gives? Bhikkhus, thing by which he gives the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, unborn suffering, sexual contraband, is born, or suffering was born in growth, or possession suffering, contraband, will be born, possession suffering was born in growth, or ignorant suffering, smuggled ignorance, is born. Ignorant suffering was born in growth. These are things need not have the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, but the bhikkhu gives. Bhikkhus, and how is the thing needs have the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, but he does not give? Bhikkhus, the thing which he gives the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, the sufferings unborn do not arise, or the sufferings were born to eradicate, or possession sufferings unborn do not arise, or the possession sufferings were born to eradicate, or ignorance sufferings unborn do not arise, or the ignorant sufferings were born to eradicate. Those are things which need to give the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, but the bhikkhu does not give. Bhikkhus, those are things called sufferings must be rid of by knowledge. Read the above passages. Surely you withdraw away to practice to eradicating the suffering by the knowledge volition very real and specific. Do not it, my friends? We quote this passage of you to aware Buddhist meditation is a kind of discharging the mind, not the kind of suppressing the mind as the patriarchs was misunderstood, then misled Buddhists, causing loss to the Buddhist path. And now, the patriarchs have left a forest sutra of Mahayana and Zen which led the Buddhists into the labyrinth of illusions meditation. No doubt, the more practice the more fame and pelf. The more fame and pelf the more they built big temples, big Buddha statues and big ego. Their egos are bigger, therefore they often discuss, argue with each other, etc. So funny, they only discuss and argue for submerging true Buddhism, but undoubted they also exposed their back for others to see their scars, without shame. We should sympathize with them because Buddhist lineage through many patriarchs and through many countries, then surely there must be some discrepancies that we have together not only to retrieve but to ameliorate the true Buddhism. The wrongdoing and adversity already affected the believer's spirit. The ones who are responsible for that are the bhikkhus, bhikkhunis and followers as well. You must get rid of the idea assumes that all what the patriarchs did are perfect. It's most hazardous if patriarchs do not practice much but have the skill of writing and editing the texts. As their practice is still superficial, they just live with ill-zion ideas, so their lineage easily deflected Buddhist path. Is that correct? We respect and love the patriarchs, but not because of that we follow them to practice their teaching. Before the Buddha entered Nibbana, understanding the follower's psychology, he left a will to his disciples: take my precepts and my teachings as the teachers, as a solid shelter. Precepts still exist, Buddhism still exists, precepts lost, Buddhism lost too. Therefore, when you see monks, nuns and lay people live transgression, breaking the precepts, so no matter how much they already practice the highest Dhamma, we also know that they are practicing the Dhamma of pagans. Do you think it is correct? Dear friends, if Buddhist is misled, then Buddhism is left in dark, and Buddhist followers are subjected to a bitter situation. Their labor, their possessions are useless. Is it correct, my friends? So, we are monks, nuns and lay Buddhists know very well it is wrong, so we should not let them practice the superstitious illusion of Buddha nature. The second method to practice for the mind to be in peace, the Buddha taught, there are desires must be eradicated by protection. Thus, the second Dhamma is to use the protection to eradicate sufferings. So protection does mean? Protection means keeping 6 senses, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, body and mind. So, how do we nurture the 6 senses? When stepping out of the hut, we should use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. I must look down, not look over, look back, glance sideways, or ear must listen whilst walking, not to be distracted by surrounding sounds. It means eyes, ears, nose, mouth, body and mind are protected. We must listen to the Buddha's teaching. Bhikkhus, how is the protection for sufferings? Here, there is a bhikkhu wisely reflected, lived with eye protection. Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not live with his eyes protected, destructive and burning brain may arise. If he lives with eyes protected, he would not suffer. The same ears, nose, mouth, body must protected as such. Bhikkhus, the Dhamma says sufferings must be eradicated. We remind you again, we must use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will to protect our six senses. However, even you are diligently practice this method, but you always talk with others, the quality of practice will be destroyed or just stomping feet on one place. Third way of practicing the mind without suffering by the method of making the mind to work with the will as the Buddha's teaching, all sufferings must be eradicated. So, the third Dhamma we must use is the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, is to receive, then eradicate sufferings. So what is the meaning of receive? Receive is to accept the requisites of keeping the body to keep up with starvation, cold, windy weather, sting from mosquitoes, etc. Example 1. A man is meditating and slowly being bitten by mosquitoes but continues meditating despite itching and pain. The incorrect thinking would be, I am here meditating and being bitten by mosquitoes as punishment for previous past life. I should try to keep the mind motionless despite the pain and discomfort. Instead, the right thinking would be, I am here meditating, mosquitoes are biting me. Then I should use mosquito net to stop them from biting me. Example 2. When we get sick and we use our power to heal our sickness incompletely, it means to direct the mind by the method of making the mind working in accordance with the will. In calming body, I know I breath in and I know I breath out. However, if it has not been mastered properly, then it will have no effect. Until it is mastered, then we should receive medication to ease the pain and shorten the time of being sick or in pain. Right as the Buddha's teachings, Bhikkhus, how the desires should be removed? There is a bhikkhu who wisely contemplates to receive clothing just for preventing coldness, heat, itching from mosquitoes' bites, the wind, the heat from the sun, reptiles, and to cover up his body from being naked. He wisely contemplates to receive alms food not for any purpose other than for the body can live long, and in accordance with the noble virtues. He used the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will so he can eradicate previous thought as well as to prevent new sensations to arise so he can live in peace. He receives the hut for shelter from bad weather and reptiles to live in tranquility and solitude. He receives medication to prevent and cure sickness and to avoid being in agony. Bhikkhus, those are things must be used receiving to eradicate sufferings. Dear friends, we should ponder these Buddha's teaching. If we do not understand his teaching, we are the same as monks and nuns of the Mahayana, Zen, Tantric, Pure Land. They are avaricious and without virtues. Here, we receive for a noble virtue life, which means for a simple life with basic material condition, which means 3 garments, a bowl, as the requisites are enough, without storage. Such life is accurate to definition of a saint who tried to eradicate sufferings. The fourth way to practice the mind without sufferings by using the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will is as the Buddha taught. There are the sufferings should be converted by enduring. So what is the meaning of enduring? It means effort and patience. That means patiently to endure any evilness happening. Example 1, as with the stench which is uncomfortable, but we remain calm and patient, the stench does not affect our mind, we still keep being calm without complaint. To gain a such mind, we must use the method of making the mind works in accordance with the will. Mind must be still as the stench, only an impermanent odor, and it will go away, or we use another phrase, mind must be imperturbed with the stench, avoiding is surrendering. Example 2, even if there is a place with plenty of flies and mosquitoes, we still live there, still be calm, but we keep it clean and convert it into a non-polluted environment. We use our patience and skillful tactic to convert that place into a hygienic area, but not to seek ways to kill the insects with a mind lacking of love. We endure multiple objects, such as hot and cold weather, starvation, flies, vilification, libel, sensation of pain, aching, unhappy, unexcited, anxieties, fear, sorrow, anger, etc. All the above subjects must be endurance. Let us read the following passage. The Buddha taught that patience can get rid of sufferings. It can be clearer and more specific with more details. Bhikkhus, how sufferings and endurance can be rid of. Bhikkhus, there was a bhikkhu wisely and patiently observed the cold and hot weather, endured hunger and thirst, insects' bites, bad weathers. He has strong physical and emotional endurance to subject to physical and emotional misery, so the destructive and burning brain could not arise. Thus can be called sufferings are rid of by endurance. If this passage cannot explain clearly the experience of a cultivated practitioner, we only know to be patient, enduring and suppressing the mind from evilness and sensation. Isn't it? When the Buddha taught us how to get rid of sufferings, he did not forget to offer us the great way of endurance. It is the method making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Please consider, Bhikkhus, because the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, unborn sufferings do not grow, and already born sufferings eradicate. If we do not use this method to eradicate the sufferings by practicing in the 7 ways above, then we suppress our mind not to annihilate sufferings. In summary, in the Sutta All Sufferings, the Buddha taught us how to eradicate sufferings in 7 ways by the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Please pay attention and remember this sutta has only one meaning, no others. The Buddhist path to annihilate all sufferings is enlightenment. Buddhist meditation is a meditation aimed to eradicate human sufferings, a practice to repel and to remove them from the body and mind. These practices do not have any difficulties, any fatigue. You must have a strong will and have to be brave with a strong mind. You will attain a mind without sufferings. Therefore, Buddha can determine a period to practice 7 days, 7 months, 7 years. The period of 7 years is the longest time that anyone can attain it. The 5th way to practice the mind without suffering by using the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will, the Buddha taught, there are sufferings should be turned out by avoiding. So, the 5th teaching must use avoidance to annihilate sufferings. So what does avoidance mean? Avoiding means should not be close, stay away, or should not stay close. The ancient taught, choose a teacher to learn, choose a friend to be with. There is an old saying, when you are often near black ink, you will eventually turn black, therefore you should choose who your friends wisely. Avoid evil friends, avoid people that drink too much and get drunk, avoid brutality and lies, cruelty, avoid people that steal, fornicate, and are untrustworthy, avoid ferocious animals, etc. In Buddhism, it teaches us to live in solitude. The purpose is to avoid these evils, avoid saying bad things about others, and so on. Reread the passage, we can see the Buddha taught us to avoid evilness from our body and mind so that it is not affected by evil actions. And Bhikkhus, how are those sufferings could be eliminated by avoiding? Bhikkhus, here a bhikkhu avoids truculent elephant, horses, or oxen. He avoids brutal dogs, snakes, tree logs, thorns, deep holes, canyons, filthy water, puddles. There are seats that not worth seating in, houses that we should not go into, and evil friends that we should not communicate with. If a connection is suspicious, we shall receive contempt by the holy friends. Thus the bhikkhu will wisely avoid those seats, houses, and evil friend that are not worthy to communicate with. Bhikkhus, if the bhikkhu did not avoid these, then the devastating and burning brain may arise. If he avoids them, then the devastating and burning brain will suffer no more. Bhikkhus, those things are sufferings that should be turned out by avoiding them. This passage has taught us that, by using the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will on a daily basis. When you know that situation has happened, then you must promptly prevent it. Dear friends, above is the way to defeat sufferings by avoiding. So you come here to practice annihilating sufferings or to grow them? You come here for the highest purpose, to live as Buddha, to live as the Dhamma, to live with the precepts, to live as the saints' disciples. If you like meeting, you like to make friends, and you still love to eat and sleep at any time, how can you avoid them? Are you doing correctly as the Buddha's teachings? As you want to annihilate all sufferings, you must live in solitude completely. You must live with true morality. If you do not live correctly as Buddhist practice, then you cannot have any benefit. It's only a waste of lifetime, but you also disturb others. Once you practice, you must practice properly according as Buddha's teachings. Do not follow the teachings of patriarchs and assume to follow Buddha's teaching. If you follow the patriarch's teachings, I am afraid you will have a serious sin before your death. You may have to spend the rest of your life in bed, although your disciples trying to hide that event, but they could not hide from the person who already had the Sanming wisdom. Therefore the person with Sanming wisdom knew the practice of patriarchs cannot be successful, knew all their dhammas just fall into the delusion of concentration, delusion of power, delusion of intelligence, delusion about Buddha nature, delusion of paradise, delusion about nibbana, etc. The Sanming person knew the patriarchs had to endure a lot of pain before their death. The Sanming person knew very well the patriarch's mind has or has not greed, hatred and delusion, and more. The Sanming person sees it as it is, nothing can conceal him. Therefore, I confirm the teaching of Mahayana and Eastern Zen are the teachings of false belief. Please pay attention on this note, because you choose the wrong methods will take to a no-through road, could lead you to be crazy to death. The sixth practice way to end sufferings by the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will that Buddha taught. There are sufferings must be discharged by elimination. So, the sixth way is elimination. So, what is the meaning of elimination? Elimination is eradication totally. Example 1. It is not yet the mealtime, but you are hungry, you want to eat a certain food, you say in your mind, eating must be right on time, not any time. And the decision not to eat at the wrong time is the method of making the mind to work in according with the will, such as, you must renounce eating at the wrong time. Want to be a saint, but still eating at the wrong time, what kind of monk is he? Example 2, it's not time to go to bed, but want to go to sleep, then do not go to bed, but to sleep at the wrong time is not easy, isn't it? Wanting to sleep at the wrong time, you must have a method to eradicate dullness and sleepiness. Dullness and sleepiness are unbearable as others. If you want to eradicate them, we have many methods, but here the Buddha taught us to use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Lethargy and sleepiness are the state of ignorance, we must eradicate and cease them. When dullness and sleepiness happen, we walk around and use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. With my calm mind, I know I am walking with the left foot. With my calm mind, I know I am walking with my right foot. Above is the need to eradicate directly sufferings, such as, my mind has desire, I know my mind has desire. Knowing my mind has desire, then I use the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Greed is suffering. I am not greedy, I do not accept you. Go away. The mind has hatred, I know the mind has hatred. When the mind has hatred, it requires to be eradicated by using the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Hatred is suffering, must go, or hatred is not for me, I do not accept you, you must go, go. We must listen to what Buddha taught, Bhikkhus. How sufferings can be eradicated. When a bhikkhu does not want desires to arise, he relinquishes it. Not only with the existent desire, he does not cling to any hatred that may arise. He does not cling to evilness, sensual pleasures which may arise. All evil thoughts are relinquished totally. Bhikkhus. If a bhikkhu does not eradicate them, all evil sufferings will affect his brain. If he abandons them, he would not suffer anymore. The above teaching are very clear. Wanting to eradicate sufferings, we must have sufficient energy, determination and bravery to prevent desires. He would rather die than to be a slave to evil desires. Having a such strong determined mind will conquer all desires. The seventh ways to practice the mind without suffering by the method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will. Buddha taught there are sufferings should be eradicated by practice. Thus, the seventh way we must use is to practice, is to use conscious thoughts to think what is right and what is wrong, such as goodness and evilness. We must select which phrase which is appropriate to our own characteristic to practice to control our mind and our body to have mindfulness, which helps us to get rid of greed, anger, ignorance, pride and suspicion. Dear friends, wanting to practice to eradicate sufferings, firstly you must know which Dhamma to practice. So, what is it? Maybe you will answer, right exertion, for foundations of mindfulness or concentration and mindfulness on breathing etc. Now not only that, my friends, the Dhamma you practice first is the 7 factors of enlightenment. We must understand and distinguish clearly the 7 enlightenments, which has 2 parts, 1 in the 7 enlightenments, 2 the 7 enlightenment capacities. So, what are the 7 enlightenments? 1. The enlightenment factor of choosing. 2. The enlightenment factor of mindfulness. 3. The enlightenment factor of effort. 4. The enlightenment factor of light sensation. 5. The enlightenment factor of joy. 6. The enlightenment factor of concentration. 7. The enlightenment factor of renunciation. To practice to cease sufferings, the enlightenment factor of choosing is the first practice. Why is it the first practice? If you want to know why it is the first practice, you must understand its meaning. So, what is the enlightenment factor of choosing? The enlightenment factor of choosing means to choose the Dhamma to practice to enlightenment. The person who practices without knowing to select the Dhamma is the person who lacks consideration, lacks thinking, lacks insight, often credulous, fragile, prone to be scammed by others. Such people are superstitious and religious fanatics. Most believers just follow the Mahayana and Eastern Zen teachings but do not study, so they practice until near death without getting any benefit. So with a lifetime of practicing no merit is gained. Therefore, someone desires to practice, he or she must choose the Dhamma, and if he or she wishes to be enlightened, probably should not practice with any initiative Dhamma they had, because it is to practice with ignorance, prone to the others scamming by false Dhamma. As you do not study carefully, you can easily fall into the trap of pagans or fall into the muzzle nets of Mahayana or Zen. How much effort and money from Buddhist followers pour into them, as mountains or forests, but at the end they cannot get any benefit, just fall into the fanatic's trap. Theravada Buddhism advises us to choose the Dhamma when commencing the practice. Choosing the Dhamma is the utmost factor when you start. As Buddha's experience in practicing, he blindly believed in the teachings of the Brahmins, so after 6 years of austerity in the jungle, his body withered away, almost dying, but did not get any benefit for lifetimes of sufferings. After discovering the way to practice by himself, he thought it is not hard and fatigueless to discharge the mind in the 7 cases above. And finally, discharging the mind by practicing the Dhamma, we must use the method of making the mind to work in accordance to the will with the 7 cases of discharging the mind. When we start to practice, we must use the 7 enlightenments. Whether living a celibate life, you still have to use the 7 enlightenments until the practice and implementation of exercise Sanming. You also have to use 7 enlightenments. However, at this period it is not 7 enlightenments, it is 7 enlightenments capacities. Now, reading the following passage, you can perceive clearly what the Buddha taught. 1/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice as to be taught, the devastating and burning brain may arise. If he practices as directed, devastating and burning brain cannot arise. 2/Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu wisely reflects practices the enlightenment factor by selecting which are based on renunciation, seclusion, detachment and cessation, then he totally abandons them. 3/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice wisely the enlightenment factor with effort and these factors of effort are not based on renunciation, seclusions, detachment and cessation, he reformed himself. 4/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice wisely the light enlightenment factors which are not based on renunciation, seclusion, detachment and cessation, so he directs himself to abandon. 5/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice wisely the enlightenment factor of happiness which is not based on renunciation, seclusion, detachment, so he directs himself to abandon. 6/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice wisely reflecting the enlightenment factor of concentration which are not based on renunciation, seclusion, detachment and cessation, so he directs himself to abandon. 7/Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice wisely the enlightenment factor of renunciation which are not based on renunciation, seclusion, detachment and cessation, so he directs himself to abandon. Bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu does not practice as to be taught, the devastating and burning brain may arise. If he practices as directed, devastating and burning brain cannot arise. Bhikkhus, that means sufferings must be eradicated by development. Reading the above sutta, we can see the Buddha taught us to discharge our mind meticulously. Every thoughts arise from numerous causes. Therefore, Buddha categorized them into 7 ways for annihilation, so depending on the suffering we use a certain method of making the mind to work in accordance with the will to eradicate them. There are direct ways to practice to cease sufferings. Anyway, we will encounter many stubborn and difficult subjects. So, look at the patriarch's practice. We can see clearly that Mahayana and Eastern Zen only teach a kind of practice to avoid and to escape from sufferings. Such practice is a waste of time and not successful. You should consider if that view is correct. The above sutta is a very great one in helping each practitioner to get rid of sufferings radically.